serious, what is the most unexplainable thing you've ever witnessed? My friends and I had just been to a few nightclubs last year and we were walking home past a shop. It was about 5 AM and the sun was coming up. By the shop we could see a man sitting against the wall with what looked like a white bag of chips. We threw nothing off it and kept walking. Then suddenly the bag of chips started moving and started flying away. It turns out this super drunk guy was just sitting there casually stroking a motherfucking seagull. How he done that I will never know. After my cat of 10 years died in December, I would hear him meowing. Usually I could just pass it off as thinking too much about him. We used to have a thing where we'd talk back and forth to each other. He'd meow and I'd call back. Clyde. He'd call again. I'd say, Clyde. Then he'd run up to me and we'd cuddle. One day I walked outside and I heard him. As if he was sitting 10 feet away. Following right after, I heard my own voice calling from far off. Clyde. The meow and my voice repeated a few more times. It was extremely nerve-wracking. When it stopped I just turned around and went back inside. I don't hear him meowing much anymore. I was sitting in the room nearest the backyard. On my laptop. Heard a knock on the sliding glass door. And looked up to see who was there. I saw a very long hand pull away. The fingers must have been about a foot long. Dark purplish grey in color. I got up from the couch. And saw a short figure running away. It disappeared before my eyes. One day my parents decide to trace the family name. We visit a village we knew ancestors came from. While visiting the graveyard we find one. Nobody is around 1 second. The next this old man appears. Apparently he is related to. Tells us we should come. For a cup of tea at his house. Gives us directions and name of place. My dad asks if the local manor house is still open to the public. He said yes. Has been since he remembers. All of the directions he gives us used landmarks that haven't existed for decades. The manor house is private. Has been for years. Owner told us he has no idea where his dude's house is. Ghost or random senile ninja? When I was in high school, my grandmother succumbed to cancer. At the funeral, my cousin and aunt sang Temporary Home by Carrie Underwood. It was my first time hearing the song. Because I never really enjoyed country music. Well, that night I was sitting around a campfire with my brother and best friend when my girlfriend called to tell me she had arrived. Her first words to me were, "Why is your ringback tone Temporary Home by Carrie Underwood?" I had her repeat it again and then just hung up the phone. My ringback tone at the time was No Sleep by Wiz Khalifa. Which I had not changed for months. I do not really believe in the supernatural. Nor do I wholeheartedly believe in coincidence. It has been something I could never explain. A couple of years ago I was listening to music on my iPod in my bedroom. I got up to use the toilet and left the iPod on my bed. I returned to my room a couple of minutes later to find my iPod gone. I searched my entire room for it and couldn't find it anywhere. I went down to the kitchen, which is at the other side of the house, to find my iPod standing perfectly upright in the center of the kitchen table. No effing clue how it got there or even how it was standing up. It was the 2nd gen iPod Touch. Nobody had been home. All the doors were locked and I hadn't gone to the kitchen before that. To this day it still amazes me how the hell it got there. The house I grew up in was built by my great-grandmother. Who died in the house? No one in my family, including me, really believes in ghosts, but this one had us scratching our heads. When I was about 8, my mom randomly lost her wedding ring. She had no memory of taking it off, but lo and behold, it was just gone. I remember searching for it with her for months. After a while, she just sort of gave up and figured it was gone forever. A year later, I brought up the missing ring again and jokingly said, "What if great-grandma took it?" My mom then looked up to the sky and half kidding said, "You'd better give it back." About an hour later, my dad comes home from work and says, "Look what I found in the driveway." Boom. Wedding ring. She had no memory of taking it off, but lo and behold, it was just gone. I remember searching for it with her for months. After a while, she just sort of gave up and figured it was gone forever. A year later, I brought up the missing ring again and jokingly said, what if great grandma took it? My mom then looked up to the sky and half kidding said, you'd better give it back. About an hour later, my dad comes home from work and says, look what I found in the driveway. Boom. I'm pretty sure my house has a friendly ghost in it. When we first moved in, the chimney would randomly blow in soot when there was no fire or wind. We got an infestation of bugs that no one could identify, and other assorted weird crap. Now it's mostly settled down, but lights will occasionally shut off after I've left a room. My dog will bark at air. Doors are left open will be closed and vice versa. I think they're just living peacefully alongside us, sharing the house. I consider them invisible friends. Me and my little brother were home alone playing Super Smash and we heard my little sister say, hey, we're over here, from the closet, but we were f***ing home alone. We went and checked it out and yoop, we were still alone. Still freaks us out and we have no explanation. Woke up during the night when I was a teenager and someone was sitting on the end of my bed. She was an older lady, just sitting there looking at me. I blinked, and she disappeared. I broke physics once in college. We were doing a liquid-liquid separation in a huge car column. Okay, it's just a really tall tube, with 2 outlet ports at the top, on top of each other. We pumped too much water into the column and it started spewing out of one of the outlets like you'd expect. Except the water was coming out of the top hole, not the bottom one. So we had water going up a tube, passing right by an open hole, going an additional 5 cm or so, then shooting out the other hole. We had no idea what was happening and just started at it while it flooded the room. Couldn't repeat it again. Damnedest thing. Nerdy as hell, but there you go. I was walking home from school with a friend when we noticed a guy leaning against his car further up the road, almost as if he was waiting for someone. He approached us as we passed by and said, I made you a painting, while handing my friend a print of a crudely painted old man. The phrase "the Lord God" was written on the bottom. He walked back to his car and drove off without explanation. It really creeped us out at the time because it almost seemed like he was waiting for us. Flash forward about 5 years. Me and this same friend are attending our city's annual block party. We were making our way back to the vehicle when that same motherfucking guy walks out from behind a food vendor's truck. It was very dark out, and he scared the piss out of me. Again he said, I made you a painting, and handed me a slightly different version of the same print before I could even react. I still have it. Shit keeps me up at night. My deceased friend claimed his house was on an Indian burial ground and was haunted. I stayed over one night. We all, 3 of us and the dog, slept in the living room and nobody nor nothing, nor no more animals were in the house. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone loudly running up and down the basement stairs. I look over and my 2 friends are passed out. I look for the dog and it's right beside my friend looking terrified as shit. I was convinced his house is haunted after that. I've posted this before, but it's relevant enough to post again. Back in high school I was always going to concerts. I was at a Metallica concert and went out to smoke a cigarette and these 2 guys my age walked up to me and said they knew me, that we went to the same school, and then proceeded to rattle off the last 6 or 7 concerts I had gone to, saying that they had seen me at them. I had never seen these guys before, ever, but they knew my name, first and last. Next day I walk into school and these 2 guys are sitting in the hall across from the door. I said hi as I walked by and the bell rang, and they just sat there. Went to class and never saw either one of them ever again. I asked around if anyone knew these 2 and everyone said no. They weren't in the yearbook either. I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle about 8 years ago, and their house is in a big subdivision, but at the time it was one of the only houses in the new phase, so it was a good mile from the other parts of the development. Anyway, it was a typical newish home. 3 bedrooms, garage, screened-in pool in the back, skylights, etc. I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room so I could watch the big TV while I was going to bed. Anyway, on the second night I hear this thudding sound coming from what sounded like the garage. So I went in to check it out and make sure nothing had fallen over or anything. Anyway, I didn't find anything. I go my back down and eventually fall asleep. I wake up to a silver polish infomercial like 2 hours later. And I roll over to grab the remote, and as I roll over I glance up at the skylight that's right above me and I see this outline of a figure staring down at me. And like 2 seconds later panic sets in. I run into my aunt and uncle's bedroom, grab his gun from the top of his closet, and call the police. Around 10 minutes, seemed like hours, later the police arrive and find my uncle's ladder set up on the side of the house. But no signs of whoever was on the roof. Not really paranormal or anything. But we never found out who was up there or why. I've got a few, but I'll go for a fairly recent one. A couple of years ago I flew to visit stay with my husband, then fiance's family for the first time. We had never met, never spoken, and I didn't know much about them. The first few weeks I was there I kept to myself and just cleaned up the house a bit while my husband and his mom were working. Since I'd first arrived I'd had a song stuck in my head, Baby Mine from the movie Dumbo, and my sister-in-law kept catching me singing it while cleaning up around the house and repeatedly asked why I was singing it. I told her I didn't know why it was stuck in my head, but it had been since I got there and it was driving me crazy. My husband eventually took me to visit his baby brother's grave. We cleaned up the grave, rearranged some flowers, and I took some photos. I then decided to take a photo of the back of the headstone and found this. http imgur.com/IUO1IQZ. I saw the guy who looked pretty much exactly like me. I saw him as he was getting off the bus and I was sitting on the seat by the window. We both stared at each other. I did longer cause I noticed the similarity first, for about 10 seconds. It was one of the most frightening experiences ever. For a second I thought I might be going insane or hallucinating. And for the ride back I felt so many feelings. Like wanting to have met him and then being afraid of actually meeting him. Wanting to know everything about him. Almost as if asking another person what it is for them to be you. I never saw this person again, and in a way I don't want to. Cause I feel like the earth might crack and swallow me. But it was just eerie. I'm glad this post exists because it's not asking what's the most paranormal blah blah blah, so I'll leave this one here. One time when I was about 15 I was sitting outside of my house relaxing in a chair and I noticed my mom come outside of our guest house. She walked towards me and turned around along with a gesture of "oh I forgot" and went back inside the house. A couple minutes later I go inside the main house and go inside my room. My mom is lying on my bed and sound asleep. My room had blackout blinds so she often napped there if her headache was bad enough. I woke her and she said she had been there for a while. I like to believe my mind just had a crazy hiccup and I imagined the whole thing. Just to clarify, it was broad daylight and nothing seemed odd about my mom when I saw her. And I even called out to her but she didn't seem to hear me. When I was a teenager, my house used to occasionally do weird things. It has since stopped. But every once in a while it would act up. The most unusual thing that occurred happened when my mom and I were standing in the kitchen. The door to my room was open nearby. But nobody was inside. While we were talking, all of a sudden a piece of jewelry came flying out of my room and skirted along the floor. To this day we have no idea how that happened. Ironically, neither one of us was freaked out about it. The place I worked at was next to a graveyard and we had a customer that told us all the time our store was haunted. I usually just kinda enlightened the customer with a conversation but ignored her comments about it. Well, one day she came in and told me to "Child, I need you to be careful. Whatever is here does not like you. I don't want you hurt, so I made this for you to protect you." And hand me a silver necklace. It was a silver necklace with a real human tooth in the pendant. I f***ing loved it. Wore it all the time. Never took it off. Fast forward a few months. I'm staying in a hotel because my apartment needed repair and I couldn't stay during construction. First night at that hotel I took off my jewelry to sleep and I woke up to a banging in my room. Little weirded out but I went back to sleep. Later I felt someone grabbing my neck and I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. A couple hours of watching TV and I hear a really loud boom above me. It looked like someone punched a hole in the wall. After that I put that necklace back on and never had a problem again. 4th of July, 2014. Portland, Oregon. My friends and I were sitting outside, watching fireworks, drinking beer, smoking weed. We noticed 2 orange, bright orbs floating in the sky. We immediately thought UFOs. I went home, googled UFO 4th of July Portland. Didn't find anything from that night, but found claims of seeing UFOs on the 4th the year before. The next day, at Portland Blues Fest with most of the same friends, a little boy, maybe 9 or 10, approaches me. He appeared to be all by himself. He says, "Can I tell you something?" I say yes. He continues, "Last night I was with my uncle while he was working. He watches security cameras for a bank. He was showing me how the thermal camera works. And we saw 3 bald men walking down the sidewalk, not emitting any body heat. And then he walks off." One time my brother bought a Minecraft miniature from Walmart. He showed it to me when I was at his place. He said it was $5 but it was teeny and kind of a rip-off, so he wouldn't have considered buying more. Next time I go there I was using his bathroom and come out and see the little zombie dude on the floor, not in the room with the display shelf, so I pick it up and bring it to him. He goes to put it back and discovers his is already there and a new one has materialized in his apartment. He says it's me trying to FCK with him, but why would I spend $5 on a miniature not worth $5 just to trick him? Come on. One evening my mother and I were trying to get our stubborn dog to go out into the backyard. She didn't want to go at all. As we were trying to convince her it was a good idea, I heard a loud clap right next to my ear. I asked Mom, "Why did you do that so close to my face?" She replied, "I didn't clap. I thought you did." Double quote. A butt-naked Caucasian young woman painted completely black, sitting down on a chair with her legs open reading a book, in the middle of a sidewalk in a Chinatown market. I was only 7. I still have no idea what the heck that was. Kind of late, but when I was younger, 15, I was home alone with my brother, 19. I was just sitting on the couch at somewhere around 11 PM and all the lights were off and I saw what I thought was him because it was his height was just looking at me. I took my socks off and balled them up and threw them at him. Only it wasn't my brother. What I saw ran away like a dog would in cartoons. After about 20 minutes of almost shitting myself, I mustered up the courage to go to my brother's room. He wasn't home. I was home alone the entire time. It could not have been an animal because I lived on the 4th floor of an apartment building with no animals allowed to live there. I've been to summer camps for language in England a couple of summers and the first one was a bell school. It was a giant mansion with a big land. Some nights we would sleep in the gardens and tents for the fun of it, but since I was in the young group, the teachers would wake us up and walk us to the toilets inside the building so, you know, we wouldn't piss ourselves. During a walk to the toilet in the dead of the night, I somehow turned a corridor without anyone noticing. I wasn't bothered at all because I followed another boy who seemed to know where he was going. He led me back outside and ran away once he heard a teacher call my name. No one believed me when I told them about that other boy and my English was only 4-5 words, so I cried in frustration for a day. FCKU English ghost or boy or WE the FCKU were. My house was haunted as a child, which is weird to say, because I'm not even sure I believe in ghosts. But man, it was like a horror film back then. Beds shaking, being strangled by invisible forces, cold spots, animals acting strange, footsteps with no cause, faces in the windows, feet being tickled, appliances switching themselves off and on, power points that leaked green goo. It was crazy. I'm not even sure I believe it. But heaps and heaps of people witness things. People who hadn't even been told about them. Once I was in the kitchen of my old apartment and a really bright golden yellow light flashed across the fridge for a second. It couldn't have been car headlights or a reflection because the window shades were drawn and the apartment did not face any roads anyway. Another time I was in my bedroom and saw a shadow that looked like a man's profile wearing a top hat. I got out of bed and went to the area the shadow was in and shuffled a bunch of stuff, clothes, objects, around, but the shape of the shadow didn't change. One time, I saw a flying object, UFO, over a hill while I was shopping with my family. I was 7 years old at the time, so I don't know what it exactly looks like. But it was a large black disc in the middle of broad daylight. Then, it made a weird, eerie sound. I asked my brother to look at the object, but as soon as I turned back to it, it disappeared. The weird thing is that nobody else noticed it. I once saw a guy overdose. I was 9. Eating pizza when a car crashes into a tree put side. The dude driving runs out screaming and gets his friend out. The friend was so white. He was glowing. He was shaking. And looked possessed. When the paramedics came, they barely helped him. The drug seminars at school were crap. But nothing scares you more off drugs than what I saw. I was parked on the side of the street with a co-worker when a kid driving a nice-ass vintage Dodge Charger slammed on his brakes, stopped in the middle of the street, got out and proceeded to put on a puppet show with a dead squirrel he found on the street. It went on for a good 5 minutes while he made it dance and sing show tunes. He only stopped when he looked up and realized we had been watching him the whole time. I was 22 years old. One day I was in our backyard doing some chores. Out of the corner of my eye I see a group of large black birds in the next yard over. I walk closer to get a better look. One of the birds is perched in a stump and all of the other birds were on the ground looking up at this bird. The bird on the stump was getting very animated. It was making a lot of noise and flapping its wings erratically. It appeared as if it was giving some sort of political speech. I must have made some noise because all of a sudden they all looked over at me and flew away. It was the weirdest thing I have ever seen. Well, one night while walking home I saw what looked like a silhouette with glowing red eyes standing under a street light. I chose to assume I either hallucinated or saw something wrong. But either way I took another street and stopped going out so late. When I was about 14, a guy who was collecting scrap from a junkyard was minding his own business when a homeless man came up, trying to take some scrap from him. The guy collecting it got a metal pipe. It wasn't completely rigid and flexible, but it was a pipe. And he started whipping the homeless man with it. My stepfather called the cops. The homeless man was a bloody mess before the police arrived. A while back me and my friend were trying to sneak into this bar, since we were underage, and we met this guy in front that was super drunk and started talking to us, telling us we were some cool guys and that he would help us get in and buy us some drinks. Suddenly a security guard comes sprinting towards us and starts talking to the drunk guy. I was kinda drunk so I couldn't make out much of what he was saying, but it was something like, "Is that your friend over there?" That the guard said and pointed to some guy running in circles screaming in the parking lot. Then what confused me is the drunk guy we were talking with got a super serious look on his face and asks, "Is he going for the balls?" And the security guard says with a straight face, "Yes." And they both ran after him and I kinda blacked out after that point. We were doing some set decorating in an old abandoned hospital for a feature film we were shooting. Me and the second AC were walking through the building's upper floors. Most of the hallway emergency exit doors at the end of each hallway were locked, so you had to walk back to the main elevator or stairwell. Although the rooms were open, we were looking for air conditioning units left behind since it was getting really warm. At the end of one of the hallways in the long-term patient care wing we distinctly heard keys jingling on a chain that could have had a million other keys on it. I stopped my friend and asked him if those were his keys, and we both checked our pockets, but had definitely left everything of ours on the main floor of our set. Suddenly we heard a door at the end of the hall swing shut and a loud bang reverberated through the empty corridor. We checked every room and found nothing. Not even air conditioning units. Open bracket. It happened to me in 2009. I was going to a friend's party, but before that I was watching a movie. I think that it was a Bleach movie. Anyways, In the middle of the movie I saw from the corner of my eye a person standing in front of mine fridge. I thought that it was my brother grabbing something to eat, but then I remembered that there was no one in home but me. I looked back and saw a young girl with brown hair, then I blinked and she disappeared. Lost the party because of that. Sorry if I was not clear. English is not my first language. Glowing orbs about the size of basketballs playfully chasing each other around over a cornfield. We got out of the car to investigate and they went straight up into the sky until we couldn't see them anymore. One night about 3 years ago I was walking along the boardwalk in Ventnor, NJ, just south of Atlantic City. I looked out over the ocean and saw 6 circular lights hovering in a line in perfect formation. Then, all of a sudden they flew apart in different directions faster than any man-made object I've ever seen. Still baffles me to this day. Halloween night and 09. Was sitting on the couch watching TV with my dad. Next thing you know I feel like I was sprayed with something. I look down at my arm and see blood droplets. I proceed to get up and look in the mirror. Blood is on my face in tiny droplets. Neither me or my dad knows where that blood came from or how it was sprayed on me. Weirdest Halloween ever. As a kid, I was swinging on a swing in a park when this teenager asked me if I wanted to see him levitate. He stood beside his 2 friends and levitate. I swear they didn't lift him. It was so weird. My dad and I bought flowers for my grandpa's grave. My dad had to help me up on top of a garbage can in order to get to put the flowers by the gravestone. It was like 6 feet high. Since he had told me the red flowers were his favorite out of all of the colored flowers, I made sure the one red flower was closest to his grave, even though it was hidden to anyone walking by. When I got down from standing on top of the garbage can, I looked up at the grave and noticed the only red flower was not only front and center but at least 2 inches higher than the rest of the flowers. Maybe it was a way of him saying thank you. Or maybe it was a weird coincidence. I like the first one better though. I was in bed having trouble sleeping one night when I was about 14. As I was laying there I heard a little boy fake a sneeze and a little girl say Danny died. Both coming from the other room. I was confused and figured I fell asleep for a second. Until I heard my mom scream and my dad jump up and run across the room. The next morning they said they woke up and saw 2 children in their room staring at them who disappeared through the wall when my dad got up. Waking up tied to a gurney. Soaking wet and freezing. I was so confused. And oh so cold. Turns out I had overdosed on heroin. I had been sitting with my head in my lap and when my friend realized what was going on she put me on the ground and threw water on me trying to wake me up. It didn't work. The EMS woke me up with Narcan. My heart was pounding because I was in atrial fibrillation. I'm soaking wet and shaking violently. Here pounding. The other weird part was the overwhelming sense of peace that I still had when I woke up. If I am being 100% honest, that feeling was better than any drug. It stuck around for quite a while too. Some background. My granddad loved small critters. But birds especially. He used to have a family of starlings nest in one of his sheds every year. He lived in an old farmhouse, and so built them a shelf and places to nest in and would give it up for them until the spring. He was that kind of guy. He was particularly close to my mum. And she was going through some health issues of her own when he passed away. Anyway. After his funeral my mother was walking out of the crematorium and a white feather fell from the sky in front of her. For the next 6 months or so, every time she was walking outside a white feather would fall from the sky. Perhaps it was coincidence. Or perhaps my granddad found a way to tell her everything was going to be okay. My grandfather always wore the same cologne. It was the smell that I associated with him. His car smelled like this. His bathroom, etc. Anyway, he was struck by a car and was very gravely injured. One night later that week, I was sitting home alone. The phone rings. Simultaneously, I smell that cologne out of nowhere. It was like someone had sprayed it right next to me. I answer and it's my dad. He's calling to say grandpa had just died. My cousin flipped a car in the lane he was driving in, without ever once leaving the lane. It rolled 3 times and never left the lane. That shouldn't be possible. I was about 10 at the time. I was sitting in the living room and we had a baby swing for my little sister. It couldn't be swung manually, you had to switch it on because the bars holding it inside the frame were all metal. Well, I'm sitting there watching TV alone at home and it starts swinging. I tripped the FCK out because what the FCK, right? I walked up to it to switch it off but it wasn't even switched on. As soon as I reached out to stop it from swinging, it just stopped. I'm 22 now and live in a different house, but I still get f-king shivers when I think about it. Fuck. I was in Canada in the middle of the Rockies volunteering on a farm. About 30 miles to any main highway. So in no way could this have been car headlights. But in the middle of the night, the camper I was staying in lit up like a Christmas tree. As if someone in a car were right outside with their headlights right on me. Unfortunately, the most unsettling part wasn't the bright light, but the noises of rustling going on around the base of the camper. As if something were trying to come in through the baseboards. Could have been an animal trying to flee the harsh light. But I still held me breath. My guy friend experienced this with me. We still have never described it to anyone else. I used to hear a voice when I was little. I remember a few distinct traits it had. It was talking to someone in the room who wasn't me. And I remember being terrified that it would talk to me. It was like hearing one side of a phone conversation. It would talk, listen, respond, listen, respond again, so on. I also remember that it was a man and that his voice was distorted, as though he was talking through a box fan. When we moved from that house, the voice stopped. But I used to hear it every night before I went to sleep. Nick, a few years back, I was with a friend in the Flatiron district when we walked past an Elvis impersonator. My friend is pretty big, so the stranger makes a quick comment about his muscles. We think it's kinda weird but shrug it off. About 2 weeks later and sometime after midnight, I'm walking home alone and suddenly the same weird Elvis jumps out at me from behind a large planter. Does a little shimmy, then runs off. A mix of being startled, confused and sudden recognition came over me in an instant. Bit late, but anyway, I was in a pub with my family wearing a gothic cross necklace. When I stood up and walked to the bar, the necklace fell to the floor. Assuming the chain snapped, I picked it up, only to find that not only was the chain still intact but the clasp was still fastened. Still have no explanation for it. I put it back on and wore it for the rest of the day fine. Monday. Dec. 15, 1997. My brother and I went to school after the weekend and kids were talking about how Chris Farley had just died. Overdosed on cocaine or had a heart attack or something. I was sad but had basically forgotten about it a few days later. The next Saturday morning I came down to breakfast and my dad was reading the newspaper. He said, "Hey, did you hear Chris Farley died?" I said, "Yeah. Everyone was talking about it at school last Monday." Double quote. My dad did a double take and then pointed to the newspaper article. "That's impossible," he said. "He only died on Thursday." Double quote. "Still don't have an explanation for it. It's the only really unexplainable event I've experienced." Sitting on my front porch in my 20s. A friend and I saw a few dorky looking guys run down the street, and then moments later a bunch of really tough looking guys ran down and stopped to ask us if we'd seen any dorky looking guys running down the street. One had a chainsaw, one had a Beretta, and one had a leaf blower. I think I'm a bit late, but I had a cousin who passed away. A month or two after he passed, I woke up in the middle of the night because my ceiling fan chain was violently shaking. The fan wasn't on and my windows weren't open. I put it off for some creepy middle of the night where everything is scarier incident and went back to bed. But as I was asleep I had what seemed like a dream, but it was so realistic and I can remember it completely, unlike a dream. I never got to tell him goodbye and it haunted me. Anyways, back to the dream. I was sat on a couch with him in a room full of SF49ers memorabilia. He was a big 49ers fan. I told him that I loved him and missed him and he hugged me. Then I woke up and I had a weird warm tingly sensation that I've never had waking up from a dream. My patient, 98 years old and mentally as sharp as a college professor, calls me to his room. Terrified that he's seeing people who can't possibly be real drifting through and whispering to him. He asks, do you think I may be losing my mind? I assure him it was either a dream or that he was dehydrated or something and not to worry about it. I don't tell him that I've had other patients who experienced similar visitations and they all died soon after. Within 12 hours he began vomiting blood. By morning he was dead. When I was about 5 playing with my Pokemon cuddly toys at the top of the stairs next to a window, I swear I saw a huge wasp fly in the window. I'm talking about beetle size. I don't know if it was my imagination or not, but I hauled us downstairs and got my dad. When we came back there was nothing there. Then recently I have this dream I'm getting out of my parents' car and the same wasp appears suddenly and goes to sting me. I woke up and sat straight up and I swear I could still hear the buzzing noise it made for a while afterwards. Edit. I forgot. I also used to hear a buzzing noise in my room in the mornings. It sounded like it was circling around my side of the room. My sister couldn't hear it until she listened really hard for it. After a while it went away. Closest I can get to unexplainable is the fact that my basement door will open itself. Just a little bit. It seemed to start just after my father passed. Which at this point makes me wonder, as he would spend lots of time in the basement. And before anyone asks, yes, we changed the doorknob. It literally cannot be opened without turning the knob. Yet it does. A random lightning ball in my room. I was chilling in my room with my mom watching TV. I don't recall if it was raining or not. But all of a sudden, fairly near to the TV, a strange light began to emanate and suddenly it cracked like a lightning bolt with what looked like a lightning strike concentrated to a single point but glowed like an orb. It didn't feel particularly weird, but one thing I noted was the smell feeling. You know those old big ass flat screens that would get the static fuzzies? It felt and smelled just like that. It was odd. Nothing electrical was affected and rest of the night continued normally. Okay. This doesn't really count since the explanation is earth tremor. But we had just finished shining a torch into a Maori burial cave, seeing several human skulls, no other bones. Just the skulls, and then within 10 seconds the earth shuddered like a Hollywood special effect. Damn freaky when you're just 14 years old. Finally, I get to tell this story, well, 2 stories. I went to a Catholic school with monks. And one monk was a hermit type guy who lived in a tiny house on the fringe of the monastery. One winter day when school was cancelled, me and a couple other guys decided to go sledding on a hill near this guy's house. We decided to change there since his house has very little heating and he would go back to the monastery when it got cold. So we do that. Go sledding. And then decide to go see one monk who was our Latin teacher and ask about something. Forgot what. Was like 5 years ago, and along the way we see the hermit monk guy f-king floating above the ground. No footprints except for ours anywhere. Here's the weirdest part. When we ask the monks about this, they said he was in his cell all day. There's no mistaking this guy since he's like 4 feet 10. The other half is that if you see him praying outside, animals will sometimes come up around him, like birds on shoulder, stray cats, the like.